The massive transport ship Dominion's Edge descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling mountain of metal and fury. Its hull, scarred from countless battles across the galaxy, cast shadows over the entire city of New Geneva as it settled onto the designated landing platform. The ship belonged to the Zephyrian Empire, the most feared military force in known space, and today they had come to collect what they considered their due. Ambassador Kethvar emerged from the ship's belly, his 6 arms crossed in a gesture that every species in the galaxy recognized as barely contained aggression. Behind him walked the elite guard of the Zephyrian fleet, each warrior standing nearly 3 meters tall, their crystalline armor gleaming like captured starlight. But it was what followed them that made even the bravest human diplomat step backward in terror. The creature that emerged was legend, made flesh. Vexthara, the Void Render, the most dangerous being the Zephyrian Empire had ever tamed. The dragon stood 4 meters at the shoulder, its obsidian scales seeming to absorb light itself. Bony spines ran along its massive back, and its eyes burned with an inner fire that had seen the destruction of entire worlds. When it breathed, the air around it shimmered with barely contained energy that could reduce mountains to ash. Humans, Kethvar's voice carried across the landing platform through his translation device, each word dripping with disdain. Your species has requested membership in the Galactic Coalition. This is unprecedented. Never before has a species so young, so primitive, dared to seek a seat among the established powers. President Chen stepped forward, flanked by Earth's finest diplomatic team. Her voice remained steady despite the obvious threat before them. Ambassador Kethvar, we appreciate the Coalition's consideration of our application. Humanity has much to offer the galactic community. The Zephyrian ambassador's laugh was like grinding metal. Offer? You misunderstand, Primitive. You are here to prove you deserve to exist in our galaxy at all. The Coalition has grown concerned about your species' rapid expansion. In merely 2 centuries, you have spread to 17 star systems. Such aggressive growth cannot be ignored. Vexthara shifted its massive weight, and the concrete beneath its claws cracked like thunder. The dragon's head turned slowly, scanning the assembled humans with predatory intelligence. Its nostrils flared, tasting the fear in the air like a fine wine. The test is simple, Kethvar continued, gesturing toward his companion. One of your kind must demonstrate your species' worthiness by surviving 5 minutes in the presence of Vexthara. The dragon will be unrestrained. If your representative can endure this trial without fleeing or begging for mercy, humanity will be granted provisional membership in the Coalition. If not, he let the threat hang in the air like smoke. The human diplomatic team exchanged glances filled with barely concealed horror. They had known this meeting would be challenging, but nothing in their preparations had suggested anything like this. Vexthara was infamous throughout the galaxy. The creature had single-handedly destroyed the rebellion on Tartarus Prime, reducing an entire continent to molten glass. It had torn apart the war fleets of 3 different species, earning its keeper a reputation that made entire star systems surrender without firing a shot. This is barbaric, Dr. Martinez, Earth's lead xenobiologist, whispered to President Chen. That creature has killed thousands. We should have brought our military. President Chen shook her head slightly. Our military presence would only confirm their belief that we're aggressive warmongers. We knew this wouldn't be easy. Who among you will face the trial? Kethvar demanded, his multiple eyes glittering with anticipation. Before any of the adults could respond, a small voice piped up from behind the diplomatic group. I'll do it. Everyone turned in shock to see a young boy, no more than 8 years old, step forward from where he had been observing with the civilian tour group. His name was Marcus Chen, the president's nephew, who had been given special permission to witness this historic first contact. His small hand was raised and his brown eyes showed no fear, only curiosity. Marcus, no. President Chen reached for her nephew, but the boy was already walking toward the dragon. Fascinating, Kethvar mused, his translator catching the nuances of surprise in his voice. A youngling volunteers. How delightfully unexpected. The trial stands regardless of the representative's age. Perhaps this will demonstrate the true nature of human courage when faced with impossible odds. The dragon's massive head lowered as it caught sight of the approaching child. Vexthara's burning eyes fixed on Marcus with the intensity of a supernova. The creature's lips pulled back, revealing teeth the size of kitchen knives, each one capable of shearing through starship hull plating. Marcus stopped just outside the creature's immediate reach, tilting his head to study the magnificent beast before him. While every adult present prepared for the worst, the boy seemed genuinely fascinated rather than terrified. The dragon's breathing created small whirlwinds of superheated air, but Marcus didn't flinch. "You're beautiful," the boy said softly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Vexithera's head tilted slightly, a gesture that might have been confusion. In all its years of conquest and destruction, no one had ever called it beautiful. The dragon's nostrils flared again, but this time it seemed to be studying the child rather than simply cataloging another victim. The Zephyrian guards shifted nervously, hands moving to their weapons. Even they were not entirely comfortable with their empire's most dangerous weapon in such close proximity to an unarmed child. Ambassador Kethavar watched with all 6 eyes, equally fascinated and horrified by what he was witnessing. Marcus took another small step forward, bringing himself within striking distance of the creature that had destroyed civilizations. The dragon's massive form tensed, muscles rippling beneath obsidian scales. Every instinct honed through millennia of warfare told it to strike, to demonstrate why it was feared across the galaxy. But something in the child's expression gave Vexithera pause. There was no challenge in the boy's stance, no aggression or fear. Only wonder and genuine admiration for a creature that most beings couldn't look upon without terror. The timer that would measure humanity's trial had not even begun. But already the greatest predator in known space found itself face to face with something it had never encountered before, a human child who saw beauty where others saw only death. The silence stretched across the landing platform like a held breath. Every human diplomat, every Zephyrian guard, every piece of recording equipment focused on the impossible scene unfolding before them. Marcus stood less than 2 meters from Vexithera, his small frame dwarfed by the dragon's massive presence, yet showing no sign of backing down. The dragon's inner fire cast dancing shadows across the boy's face as Vexithera lowered its great head even further. The creature's breathing was controlled now, deliberate as if it were trying to understand this strange new puzzle. Steam rose from its nostrils, but the superheated air seemed to flow around Marcus rather than burning him. "The trial begins now," Ambassador Kethavar announced, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that had not been there before. He activated a holographic timer that began counting down from 5 minutes. 5 minutes for the human child to prove his species' worthiness. Marcus glanced briefly at the timer, then back at the dragon. 5 minutes isn't very long to make a new friend, he said conversationally. But I guess we'll have to try. Vexithera's massive eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in what could only be described as confusion. The creature had faced armies, had stared down the most hardened warriors in the galaxy, but this small human was treating their encounter like a playground meeting. It was so far outside the dragon's experience that its natural aggression seemed to short-circuit. President Chen watched her nephew with a mixture of terror and pride. She knew Marcus had always been different, had always possessed an unusual fearlessness when it came to animals. As a toddler, he had walked up to their neighbor's aggressive German shepherd and simply sat down next to it, humming softly until the dog calmed down. But this was not a dog. This was a creature that could level cities. "Your nephew has remarkable composure," Dr. Martinez whispered, his scientific mind already analyzing the unprecedented interaction. "Look at the dragon's posture. It's not in attack mode anymore. If anything, it seems curious." The dragon's great head tilted to one side, studying Marcus with an intelligence that burned behind its fiery eyes. Slowly, very slowly, Vexithera began to circle the boy. Its massive claws clicked against the concrete with each careful step. But the creature moved with surprising grace for something so large. Marcus turned in place, keeping eye contact with the dragon as it moved around him. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "you remind me of my cat Whiskers. She likes to circle around new people too, trying to figure out if they're safe." Several of the Zephyrian guards exchanged glances. Their translation devices were working perfectly, but the concept of comparing their ultimate weapon to a domestic pet was so absurd it barely registered. "The child shows no fear," one guard muttered in the Zephyrian language, forgetting that human translation technology had advanced considerably in recent years. "Perhaps he is too young to understand the danger," another replied. Ambassador Kethavar's expression was unreadable, but his 6 arms had uncrossed, a sign that his aggressive posture was softening despite himself. This was not how these trials usually proceeded. Typically, the representative would spend the entire 5 minutes either cowering in terror or making futile attempts at combat. This casual conversation was completely unprecedented. Marcus suddenly sat down cross-legged on the concrete, a movement so unexpected that several guards reached for their weapons. But the boy was simply settling in for what appeared to be a more comfortable conversation. "I bet you've seen lots of worlds," Marcus said, looking up at the dragon who had paused in its circling. "I've only been to Earth, but I really want to travel someday. My aunt says if humans join the coalition, I might get to visit other planets. That would be amazing." Vexthara lowered its massive head until it was only a meter above the seated child. The dragon's breath washed over Marcus in waves of superheated air, but the boy didn't even sweat. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped candy. "I brought these for the meeting," Marcus explained, unwrapping the sweet. "They're peppermints. I don't know if dragons can eat candy, but would you like to try one?" The offer of food to Vexithara was so unexpected that Ambassador Kethvar actually stepped backward. The dragon was a predator, a weapon of war. It fed on the life force of its enemies and required no sustenance beyond the violence it dealt. Yet here was this child, offering it a piece of candy as if they were sharing lunch. Vexithara's massive nostrils flared as it caught the scent of peppermint. The dragon had smelled millions of different things across countless worlds. But this simple, clean scent was somehow different. There was no fear mixed with it, no desperate attempt at bribery. It was just a genuine offer from one being to another. The timer showed 3 minutes remaining. Marcus popped the candy into his own mouth and smiled as the cool mint flavor spread across his tongue. "It's really good," he said. "Sweet and cool. Maybe next time I can bring you one." Next time. The words hung in the air with surprising weight. No one had ever spoken to Vexithara about a next time that didn't involve destruction or conquest. The dragon's great head lowered further, until its burning eyes were level with the boy's face. For a moment that lasted an eternity, predator and child simply looked at each other. Marcus saw ancient wisdom and terrible loneliness in those fiery depths. Vexthara saw something it had never encountered before, absolute acceptance without an agenda. "You're not really angry, are you?" Marcus asked softly. "You're just doing what they tell you to do." "I have to do that sometimes too. Adults are always telling kids what to do even when we don't want to." The dragon's breathing changed subtly, becoming slower, deeper. The inner fire that always burned in its chest seemed to bank slightly, like coals settling in a fireplace. 2 minutes remaining, Ambassador Kethvar announced, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. This was not going according to any protocol he knew. Marcus slowly stood up, his movements careful but unafraid. "Can I touch you?" he asked. "I promise I'll be gentle. I know you're probably stronger than anything, but I bet you're careful too, aren't you? Strong things have to be careful, or they might break things they don't mean to." The question hung in the superheated air like a challenge to everything the galaxy thought it knew about the most dangerous creature in known space. Time seemed suspended as Marcus waited for the dragon's response. Vexithara's massive form had gone completely still, as if the creature were processing a concept so foreign that its ancient mind needed extra time to understand it. The boy stood with his hand partially extended, not reaching forward but simply offering, letting the dragon decide. Around the landing platform, the tension was so thick it seemed solid. President Chen had stopped breathing entirely. Her hand clutched to her chest as she watched her nephew stand in the shadow of the galaxy's most feared predator. The Zephyrian guards had their hands on their weapons, but none dared to move, afraid that any sudden motion might trigger the violence they all expected. Dr. Martinez was frantically taking readings on his portable scanner, but the numbers made no sense. Vexthara's energy output had dropped significantly from its normal levels. The creature's biosignature showed patterns he had never seen before in any of the documentation about Zephyrian dragons. It was as if the beast were actively suppressing its natural destructive instincts. 90 seconds remaining, Ambassador Kethvar announced, but his voice was barely above a whisper now. He found himself leaning forward despite his better judgment, as captivated by this impossible interaction as everyone else. Vexithara moved with deliberate slowness, lowering its great head until the black scales of its snout were just centimeters from Marcus's outstretched hand. The dragon's breath created small whirlwinds around the boy, but Marcus didn't flinch. He simply waited, patient as only a child could be when something truly interested them. "That's it," Marcus whispered encouragingly. "I know you're being careful." "Thank you." The first contact was so gentle it was barely perceptible. The dragon's snout, which could punch through starship armor, touched Marcus's palm with the delicacy of a butterfly landing. The boy's small hand looked impossibly tiny against the massive scale that could have easily covered his entire body. What happened next would be recorded by every camera, present and studied by xenobiologists for generations to come. Marcus didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he very slowly began to stroke the dragon's snout, his touch feather-light but unmistakably affectionate. "Your scales are warm," Marcus observed with genuine wonder, "and they're not rough like I thought they'd be. They're smooth, like river rocks." Vexithera's eyes, which had burned with inner fire for millennia, seemed to dim slightly, but not from weakness. It was as if the creature were allowing itself to experience something other than rage for the first time in its existence. The dragon's massive body relaxed in increments, tension leaving muscles that had been coiled for battle since birth. "Impossible," one of the Zephyrian guards breathed in his native language. "The void render it's actually allowing the touch." Ambassador Kethvar's 6 arms hung limply at his sides as he witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about his empire's greatest weapon. Vexithara had been bred for war, trained from hatching to be the ultimate destroyer. The creature had never shown affection or gentleness to anyone, not even its handlers. Marcus continued his gentle stroking, gradually growing bolder as the dragon remained calm. "You have really pretty eyes," he told Vexithera conversationally. "They're like looking into a campfire. My dad used to take me camping, and we'd sit by the fire and watch the flames dance. Your eyes dance like that." The dragon's response was so subtle that most observers missed it entirely. Vexithara's great head tilted slightly into Marcus's touch, a gesture so reminiscent of a cat seeking affection that Dr. Martinez actually dropped his scanner in shock. 60 seconds, Ambassador Kethvar called out, but the words seemed to come from very far away. Marcus looked up at the timer, then back at the dragon. "We don't have much time left," he said sadly, "but I'm really glad I got to meet you. I hope—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I hope someday you get to do things you want to do, not just things other people tell you to do." The boy's words hit the dragon with unexpected force. In all its years of existence, no one had ever considered what Vexithara might want. The creature had been a weapon, a tool, a symbol of fear, but never had anyone acknowledged that it might have desires of its own. Something shifted in the dragon's ancient mind. A wall that had been built through years of conditioning and genetic manipulation developed its first crack. Vexithara had been created to be the perfect weapon, incapable of mercy or affection. But here was this small human who saw something beyond the monster everyone else feared. Marcus stepped closer until he was standing directly beside the dragon's massive head. The heat radiating from Vexithara's body should have been unbearable, but somehow the boy seemed unaffected. He reached up with both hands now, stroking the scales along the creature's jaw with the same gentle attention he might give to a beloved pet. "You're not scary at all," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the absolute silence that had fallen over the landing platform. "You're just lonely, aren't you? I get lonely sometimes, too. It's hard when everyone expects you to be something you're not." 30 seconds remained on the timer, but nobody was watching it anymore. Every eye was fixed on the impossible sight of a human child comforting the most dangerous creature in known space. Vexithara's great head moved slightly, pressing more firmly into Marcus's touch. The gesture was unmistakably affectionate, a seeking of comfort that the dragon had never allowed itself to feel before. For just a moment, the galaxy's ultimate weapon allowed itself to simply be a living creature, seeking connection with another being. "I wish I could stay longer," Marcus said, his own voice growing sad. "But I promise if my aunt becomes friends with your people, I'll ask to visit you again." "Would you like that?" The dragon's response was barely perceptible but unmistakable to everyone watching. Vexithara nodded. It was a small motion, almost hesitant, but it was clearly deliberate. The creature that had terrorized the galaxy was agreeing to a child's request for friendship. Ambassador Kethvar's translator caught his involuntary gasp. In all his years of working with Vexithara, He had never seen the dragon respond to anyone with anything other than calculated violence or cold indifference. This display of what could only be called affection was rewriting everything the Zephyrian Empire thought they knew about their ultimate weapon. 10 seconds remained on the timer, but the trial had already transformed into something no one had expected. What had begun as a test of human courage had become a demonstration of something far more powerful. The universal need for connection and understanding that transcended species, power, and fear itself. The timer reached its final seconds, each beep echoing across the landing platform like a countdown to destiny. Marcus looked up at the display showing 3 seconds remaining, then back at Vexithara's massive face so close to his own. The dragon's fiery eyes held an expression that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. Uncertainty mixed with something that could only be described as hope. "Time's almost up," Marcus said softly, his small hand still resting gently on the dragon's snout. "But before it ends, I want to do something my mom always did when I was scared or sad." 2 seconds, without hesitation, without fear. Marcus rose up on his tiptoes and pressed his lips gently against the tip of Vexithara's massive snout. It was the softest, most innocent of kisses, the kind a child might give to a beloved pet or a parent before bedtime. But in that moment it became the single most significant gesture in galactic history. 1 second. The effect on Vexithara was immediate and profound. The dragon's entire body went rigid, not with aggression but with shock. The creature's ancient mind, shaped by millennia of violence and destruction, suddenly encountered an emotion it had no framework to understand. The kiss was so gentle, so purely given without expectation of anything in return, that it shattered something fundamental in the dragon's conditioning. 0. The timer's final beep seemed to hang in the air forever. Marcus stepped back, smiling up at the dragon with the uncomplicated joy of a child who had just made a new friend. "There," he said happily. "Now you know someone cares about you." For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was so complete that the only sound was the whisper of wind across the landing platform and the distant hum of the city beyond. Then, Vexithara did something that had never been recorded in any historical document, any battle report, or any scientific study of Zephyrian dragons. The creature's eyes, which had burned with inner fire for its entire existence, filled with what could only be tears. They were not the tears of pain or rage that some species shed, but something far more profound, tears of recognition, of understanding, of a connection that transcended every barrier that had been built around the dragon's heart. A single crystalline tear, glowing with the same inner fire as Vexithara's eyes, rolled down the massive creature's snout and fell to the concrete platform where it struck with the soft chime of breaking glass. Ambassador Kethavar staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. In all his years serving the Zephyrian Empire, in all his study of their ultimate weapon, he had never heard of Vexithara displaying anything that could be called vulnerability. Dragons of Vexithara's breed were genetically engineered to be incapable of such emotions. Yet here was undeniable proof that something fundamental had changed. "This is impossible," Dr. Martinez whispered, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. "According to every study we've done on Zephyrian dragons, they're incapable of forming emotional attachments. Their neural pathways are specifically designed to prevent it." President Chen found her voice first. "Marcus," she called softly, not wanting to break the spell that had fallen over the gathering. "Come here, sweetheart." But Marcus didn't move. He was still looking up at Vexithara with concern in his young eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked the dragon. "Did I hurt you? I didn't mean to make you cry." The dragon's massive head lowered until it was resting on the platform next to Marcus. Vexithara's breathing had changed completely, becoming slow and even, almost peaceful. The creature's fiery eyes fixed on the boy with an intensity that held no threat, only a kind of desperate gratitude. "The trial is complete," Ambassador Kethavar announced, but his voice lacked any of its former authority. He seemed to be speaking automatically, his mind still trying to process what he had witnessed. "The human child has survived the 5 minutes." "Survived?" President Chen stepped forward, her diplomatic training finally overriding her maternal instincts. "Ambassador, I would hardly call what just occurred mere survival. My nephew didn't just endure your trial. He—" She paused, searching for words that could adequately describe the impossible. "He befriended your dragon." The Zephyrian guards were murmuring among themselves in their native language, their translation devices picking up fragments of conversation that revealed their confusion and concern. Words like unprecedented and impossible and what do we report filtered through the air. Marcus, oblivious to the diplomatic implications of what he had done, continued to stroke Vexithera's snout with gentle affection. "You're not crying because you're sad, are you?" he asked the dragon. "Sometimes people cry when they're happy too. My mom used to cry happy tears when she was really proud of me." Vexithara's response was barely audible, a sound so low it was felt more than heard. The dragon was purring, a deep, rumbling vibration that came from somewhere deep in its massive chest. It was a sound that none of the Zephyrian handlers had ever heard before, because no one had ever given Vexithara a reason to purr. "By the void," one of the guards breathed in heavily accented English. "The void render is content. How is this possible?" Ambassador Kethvar's 6 arms hung at his sides as he struggled with the implications of what he was witnessing. Vexithara was the Zephyrian Empire's ultimate deterrent, the creature that kept entire star systems in line through fear alone. If word spread that the galaxy's most feared predator could be tamed by a human child's kiss, it would fundamentally alter the balance of power across known space. But even as these thoughts raced through his mind, Kethavar found himself unable to tear his gaze away from the incredible scene before him. There was something beautiful about it, something that spoke to buried memories of his own species' forgotten capacity for gentleness. The Zephyrians had conquered the galaxy through strength and fear, but this small human had accomplished something no army had ever managed. He had reached the heart of their most powerful weapon. Marcus suddenly looked up at the assembled adults, his face bright with excitement. "Can Vexithara come visit Earth sometime?" he asked with the innocent enthusiasm of a child planning a play date. "I could show him my room and we could read books together. I bet he's really smart." The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the galaxy thought it knew about diplomacy, warfare, and the nature of power itself. A human child was casually suggesting that the most dangerous creature in known space should come for a visit, as if friendship could bridge the vast gulf between species that had been built on millennia of conquest and fear. And in that moment, watching Vexithara's gentle response to Marcus's continued affection, nobody could think of a single reason why it shouldn't be possible. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication networks could carry it. Within hours of the incident on Earth, every major species in the Galactic Coalition was analyzing footage of a human child kissing the nose of Vexithara, the most feared creature in known space. The implications were staggering, and the reactions varied wildly depending on who was watching. On the Andromedan homeworld, the Council of Minds convened an emergency session. The Andromedans were an ancient species, their collective consciousness having observed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. They watched the footage in stunned silence as their shared thoughts raced with possibilities they had never considered. The small human demonstrated no fear response, observed Council Mind Prime through their telepathic network. This suggests either profound ignorance of danger or a fundamental difference in human psychology that we have failed to recognize. Observe the dragon's reaction, another mind contributed. Vexithara's biosignature shows patterns consistent with what primitive species call affection. This should be genetically impossible for a Zephyrian war dragon. Meanwhile, in the crystal cities of the Luminari, the situation was being analyzed through their unique perspective as energy beings. The Luminari experienced emotions as visible light patterns, and their recordings of Vexithara's energy signature during the encounter showed something unprecedented. The dragon's energy field shifted to harmonics. "We have never observed," reported Brightwave Cascade, their primary ambassador, during the moment of physical contact with the human child. Vexithara's destructive resonance patterns completely transformed into frequencies associated with protection and nurturing. The recording was played repeatedly throughout their realm, each viewing revealing new layers of complexity in the energy exchanges between boy and dragon. The Luminari began to theorize that humans might possess some form of empathic field that could affect even the most heavily conditioned predators. But it was the reaction on Zephyr Prime that truly mattered. The Zephyrian High Command had called an emergency conclave, summoning war leaders from across their empire to witness the footage and debate its implications. The massive war room, carved from living rock deep beneath the planet's surface, had never hosted a discussion quite like this one. Supreme War Leader Gaxtol paced the length of the chamber, his 8 legs clicking against the stone floor in an agitated rhythm. "This changes everything," he growled through his translator, his forearms gesturing emphatically. "If a single human child can neutralize our ultimate weapon through simple affection, what does that say about our entire military doctrine? Perhaps the child possesses some form of psychic ability unknown to our scientists," suggested War Leader Venthari, her crystalline armor reflecting the harsh lights of the chamber. "Humans are a young species. They may have latent capabilities that have not yet manifested in their general population." The debate continued for hours, but underlying all their military posturing was a deeper concern that none of them wanted to acknowledge. Many of the Zephyrian war leaders had witnessed the footage multiple times, and each viewing revealed something that troubled them more than any strategic consideration. Vexithera had looked happy. Back on Earth, the diplomatic compound had become a whirlwind of activity. Representatives from dozens of species were demanding immediate audiences, some seeking to understand humanity's apparent ability to pacify dangerous creatures, others wanting to study Marcus himself. The boy had become overnight the most famous human in the galaxy, but Marcus was largely oblivious to his newfound fame. He sat in the compound's garden, drawing pictures with colored pencils while adults rushed around him in barely controlled chaos. His current artwork showed a small stick figure holding hands with a large black dragon, both figures surrounded by hearts and flowers. "Marcus." President Chen approached her nephew carefully, settling onto the bench beside him. "Do you understand what happened today? How important it was?" The boy looked up from his drawing, his face scrunched in concentration. "I made a new friend," he said simply. "That's always important, isn't it?" Dr. Martinez joined them, his tablet filled with preliminary analysis of the day's events. "Marcus, can you tell us how you knew Vexithera wouldn't hurt you? Were you afraid at all?" Marcus considered the question seriously, the way children do when adults ask them something they think is important. "I wasn't really scared," he said finally. He looked sad more than scary, like when Whiskers hides under the bed during thunderstorms. She acts all tough and hisses, but really she just wants someone to tell her everything's okay. The simplicity of the explanation was both profound and troubling to the adults. If Marcus was right, if humanity's natural empathy allowed them to see past the conditioning and genetic modification that created weapons like Vexithera, it suggested capabilities that could reshape galactic civilization. Ambassador Kethfar appeared at the edge of the garden, his 6 arms held in a gesture of formal approach. He had been in constant communication with his superiors since the trial ended, and his normally confident demeanor showed cracks of uncertainty. "President Chen," he said carefully, "I have received new instructions from the High Command. They wish to extend humanity's trial period. There are questions that must be answered before the Coalition can make a final determination about your species' membership." "What kind of questions?" President Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The High Command wishes to study your nephew," Kethvar admitted. "They want to understand how he accomplished what seasoned warriors cannot. They want to know if this ability is unique to him or common among your species." Marcus looked up from his drawing again, his young face showing no concern about being the subject of such intense scrutiny. "Will I get to see Vexithara again?" he asked hopefully. Kethvar's translator caught his startled intake of breath. The dragon has refused to return to its containment chamber. Vexithara remains on the landing platform, and our handlers report that it has been making sounds they describe as plaintive calls. We believe it is calling for you." The admission clearly cost the ambassador considerable effort. Acknowledging that their ultimate weapon was pining for a human child went against everything the Zephyrian Empire stood for. Marcus jumped up from the bench, his drawing forgotten. "He's calling for me? Can I go see him, please?" Before any of the adults could respond, a sound echoed across the diplomatic compound that made everyone freeze. It was deep and mournful, carrying across the distance like the song of some ancient leviathan. The sound was unmistakably a call, and it was coming from the direction of the landing platform. "That's him," Marcus said with absolute certainty. That's Vexthara calling for me. He's lonely. The boy started walking toward the landing platform with the determined stride of a child on a mission. President Chen moved to stop him, but Dr. Martinez caught her arm. Wait, the scientist said quietly. Maybe we need to see where this leads. That dragon has been the galaxy's ultimate weapon for decades, but it's never shown attachment to anyone before. If Marcus can truly communicate with it, the implications hung unspoken in the air. If humans possess some natural ability to reach even the most conditioned predators, it could mean more than just coalition membership. It could mean humanity had a role to play in healing the wounds that millennia of galactic warfare had created. Another call echoed across the compound, more urgent this time, and Marcus broke into a run toward his friend. Marcus burst onto the landing platform with the boundless energy of childhood, his small legs carrying him as fast as they could toward the massive form of Vexthara. The dragon had remained exactly where the boy had left him hours earlier, its great head raised toward the diplomatic compound as if watching and waiting. The moment Vexthara spotted Marcus, the change was immediate and dramatic. The dragon's plaintive calls transformed into what could only be described as rumbles of joy. The creature's massive tail, which could level buildings with a casual swipe, wagged like that of an excited puppy. The sight was so incongruous that the Zephyrian guards, who had been maintaining a nervous perimeter around their former weapon, actually took steps backward in shock. Vexthara, Marcus called out happily, running directly toward the dragon without any regard for protocol or safety. I heard you calling. I came as fast as I could. The dragon lowered its great head to the platform as Marcus approached, and the boy immediately threw his arms around the massive snout in an enthusiastic hug. Vexthara's eyes closed in what appeared to be contentment, and the deep purring sound resumed, vibrating through the concrete platform like a gentle earthquake. Ambassador Kethvar had followed the group to the landing platform, accompanied by President Chen, Dr. Martinez, and a growing crowd of diplomats and scientists from various species. What they witnessed challenged every assumption about the nature of bonding between species. This is unprecedented, Dr. Martinez murmured, his instruments detecting energy signatures he had never seen before. The dragon's stress hormones have dropped to near zero levels. Its neural activity shows patterns consistent with what we would call happiness and contentment. President Chen watched her nephew with a mixture of pride and concern. Marcus, sweetheart, you need to be careful. Vexthara is very big, and even if he doesn't mean to hurt you, he won't hurt me, Aunt Sarah, Marcus replied with the absolute certainty that only children possess. He's my friend. Friends don't hurt each other. As if to demonstrate the point, Vexthara shifted position with exaggerated care, ensuring that no part of its massive body came close to accidentally striking the boy. The dragon's movements were precise and deliberate, showing a level of awareness and consideration that stunned the observers. Impossible, one of the Zephyrian guards muttered in his native language. The beast shows more restraint with the human child than it ever has with its own handlers. Ambassador Kethvar's expression was unreadable as he watched the interaction. He had received new orders from the High Command during the hours since the trial, orders that would fundamentally change the relationship between the Zephyrian Empire and their ultimate weapon. President Chen, he said formally, I must inform you that the High Command has made a decision regarding Vexthara. The dragon's attachment to your nephew has created a situation that we are not equipped to handle. Marcus looked up from where he was examining one of Vexthara's massive claws with fascination. What kind of situation? Kethvar's 6 arms shifted in what his species considered a gesture of significant discomfort. Vexthara has been our Empire's ultimate weapon for nearly a century. But a weapon that refuses to leave the side of a potential enemy is no longer useful to us. The implications of his words sent a chill through the assembled diplomats. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, his scientific mind immediately grasping the problem. You're saying that Vexthara's attachment to Marcus has compromised its effectiveness as a military asset. More than that, Kethvar admitted reluctantly. Our handlers report that when they attempted to guide Vexthara back to the transport ship, the dragon became aggressive toward them. It appears to view any attempt to separate it from the human child as a threat. To demonstrate the point, one of the Zephyrian guards took a cautious step toward Marcus. Vexthara's response was immediate and unmistakable. The dragon's great head swung toward the guard and a low growl rumbled from its throat. The sound held no real menace, but it was clearly a warning. The guard quickly stepped back, and Vexithera immediately returned its attention to Marcus, nuzzling the boy gently with its massive snout. "You see our dilemma," Kethavar continued. "Vexithera has effectively chosen its loyalty, and that loyalty is no longer to the Zephyrian Empire." Marcus, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the partial attention that children give to discussions they don't fully understand, suddenly brightened. "Does that mean Vexithera can stay here with me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to every diplomatic protocol in existence. The idea of the galaxy's most powerful predator taking up residence on Earth as a human child's pet was so absurd that several of the assembled diplomats actually laughed nervously, but Ambassador Kethavar did not laugh. Instead, he looked directly at President Chen with an expression that conveyed the full weight of his dilemma. "President Chen, the Zephyrian High Command is prepared to make an unprecedented offer. They will cede custody of Vexithera to Earth, effectively granting your nephew permanent guardianship of the creature." The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Martinez's tablet slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the platform. President Chen's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. "You're offering to give us your ultimate weapon?" she asked incredulously. "We are offering to give your nephew his friend," Kethavar corrected. "The weapon that was Vexithera no longer exists. What remains is a creature that has formed an inexplicable bond with a human child. From a military perspective, this makes the dragon useless to us. From a diplomatic perspective, it may represent an opportunity." Marcus had returned to his examination of Vexithera's claws, apparently unaware that the adults were discussing his future. "Look," he said excitedly, "his claws aren't sharp at the tips. They're more like really big fingernails. I bet he could pick up really tiny things if he wanted to." Vexithera demonstrated this by delicately plucking a flower from a nearby garden bed and offering it to Marcus with the precision of a surgeon. The boy accepted the gift with delight, tucking the flower behind his ear. "There are conditions, of course," Kethavar continued, his voice taking on the formal tone of diplomatic negotiation. "Vexithera must remain on Earth under human supervision. The dragon may not be used as a weapon by humanity. And most importantly, the creature's welfare becomes Earth's responsibility." President Chen looked at her nephew, who was now teaching Vexithera how to play patty cake using one massive claw against his small hands. The dragon was following the rhythm perfectly, its ancient intelligence adapting to this new form of interaction with obvious enjoyment. "And in return?" she asked. Ambassador Kethavar's expression softened slightly, showing a glimpse of something that might have been hope. "In return, the Zephyrian Empire would like to propose a new form of relationship with humanity. Not as conquerors and conquered, not as superiors and inferiors, but as curious observers of what you might be able to teach us." The dragon and the boy continued their game, oblivious to the fact that they were reshaping the diplomatic landscape of the entire galaxy. Vexithera's rumbling laughter mixed with Marcus's delighted giggles, creating a sound that no one present had ever heard before. The voice of friendship transcending every barrier that had ever divided species in the known universe. 6 months after the incident that would later be known as the Awakening, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The simple act of a human child kissing a dragon's nose had set in motion a cascade of events that challenged millennia of established order. Earth had become the most sought-after destination in known space, not for its resources or strategic value, but for what observers called the Marcus effect. Representatives from dozens of species arrived daily, each hoping to witness firsthand the impossible bond between boy and dragon that had captured the galaxy's imagination. Marcus, now 9 years old, had adapted to his fame with the resilience that only children possess. He still went to school, still played with his friends, and still did his homework. The only difference was that his best friend happened to be a 4-meter-tall dragon, who waited patiently outside the school building every afternoon to walk him home. Vexithera had proven to be everything Marcus had believed from their first meeting. Gentle, intelligent, and capable of surprising kindness, the dragon had learned to modulate its internal temperature to avoid accidentally burning anything, had mastered the art of moving through human environments without causing damage, and had even developed a fondness for Earth's music, often humming along to Marcus's favorite songs in harmonics that made glass resonate like bells. The transformation went deeper than anyone had expected. Vexthara's presence on Earth had attracted the attention of xenobiologists, psychologists, and philosophers from across the galaxy. Dr. Martinez had published 17 papers on the dragon's behavioral changes, each one revealing new aspects of emotional development that challenged existing theories about genetic conditioning. The neural pathways that were supposedly removed during Vexthara's conditioning were never actually destroyed. Dr. Martinez explained to the gathered assembly of galactic scientists. They were simply suppressed. Marcus's friendship provided the emotional catalyst needed to reactivate dormant capacity for affection and social bonding. The implications extended far beyond a single dragon. The Zephyrian Empire had quietly begun experimenting with different approaches to their military doctrine, influenced by what they had learned from observing Vexthara's transformation. Other war dragons in their fleet had begun showing signs of independent thought and emotional complexity when exposed to gentler treatment. Ambassador Kethvar had become a permanent resident of Earth, officially serving as liaison between the Zephyrian Empire and humanity, but privately fascinated by what he was learning about alternative forms of strength. He spent hours watching Marcus and Vexthara play in the diplomatic compound's expanded gardens, taking notes on interactions that his warrior culture had never considered possible. The human child demonstrates a form of courage we never recognized, he reported to the High Command during one of his regular communications. He shows no fear of power, but he also shows no desire to dominate or control. This paradox seems to be fundamental to their species' approach to relationships. The Galactic Coalition had officially granted humanity full membership 3 months earlier, but the decision had been unanimous rather than contested. Species that had initially viewed humans as primitive curiosities now competed for the opportunity to establish cultural exchange programs with Earth. The most remarkable change, however, was happening on worlds throughout the galaxy. Reports began filtering in of other impossible friendships, a Andromedan collective consciousness forming individual bonds with human diplomats, luminary energy beings learning to experience physical affection through human touch, and even warrior races like the Kragath discovering that their aggressive instincts could be channeled into protective rather than destructive behaviors when exposed to human empathy. Marcus, blissfully unaware of his role in these galactic transformations, was focused on more immediate concerns. He sat in the diplomatic compound's main garden, working on his latest art project while Vexthara provided helpful commentary and occasional assistance with hard-to-reach colors. I think we need more blue in the sky, Marcus said thoughtfully, studying his painting of the landing platform where they had first met. What do you think, Vex? The dragon's massive head tilted to study the artwork, then made a low rumbling sound that Marcus had learned meant agreement. Vexthara carefully selected a brush between 2 claws and dabbed it in blue paint, adding delicate touches to the painted sky with the precision of a master artist. President Chen approached the pair, carrying a formal document that had arrived that morning from the Coalition headquarters. Marcus, I have some news that I think will make you very happy. The boy looked up from his painting, his face bright with curiosity. What kind of news? The Coalition has approved a new program called Friendship Ambassadors, President Chen explained, settling onto a bench where she could watch both her nephew and his remarkable companion. They want you and Vexthara to visit other worlds, to help them learn what you've taught us about understanding between different species. Marcus's eyes widened with excitement. We get to travel to other planets? Really, all of them? Well, not all at once, and President Chen laughed. But yes, you'll get to see other worlds, meet other species, and maybe help them discover the same kind of friendship you and Vexthara have found. Vexthara's rumbling purr indicated the dragon's enthusiasm for the prospect. The creature had expressed curiosity about its origins and the worlds it had visited during its time as a weapon, but now with the possibility of seeing them through new eyes, as a friend rather than a destroyer. Can I take my art supplies? Marcus asked practically. I want to paint pictures of all the new places we visit. I think that can be arranged, President Chen replied, watching as her nephew turned to share his excitement with his dragon companion. As the day progressed and the news of the Friendship Ambassador program spread, representatives from dozens of worlds began submitting formal requests for visits. The galaxy that had once been held together by a careful balance of power and fear was discovering something far more sustainable. The possibility of genuine understanding between species. Ambassador. Kethvar found President Chen later that evening, as she stood on the observation deck watching Marcus and Vexithera play fetch in the garden below. The dragon was being impossibly gentle with a tennis ball, tossing it with just enough force for the boy to catch without being knocked over. "I have received word from the High Command," Kethvar said quietly. "They wish to extend an official invitation for Marcus and Vexithera to visit Zephyr Prime." President Chen raised an eyebrow. "Your homeworld? That seems significant." "It is," Kethvar admitted. "There are others of Vexithera's kind there, creatures who have never known anything but warfare and conditioning. The High Command believes that if they could witness what Vexithera has become, it might change the fundamental nature of our empire." Below them, Marcus had convinced Vexithera to lie down so the boy could climb onto the dragon's back. The massive creature remained perfectly still as Marcus settled between its shoulder blades, then began a slow circuit of the garden, moving with the careful gait of a horse giving a child their first riding lesson. "The galaxy is changing," President Chen observed. "A year ago, who could have imagined that the most feared predator in known space would be giving riding lessons to a human child?" "Perhaps," Kethvar replied thoughtfully, "that is exactly the kind of change the galaxy has needed for millennia. Fear and power have their place, but they cannot build the kind of lasting peace that friendship can create." As the sun set over Earth, casting long shadows across the diplomatic compound, Marcus's laughter echoed through the gardens. It was joined by Vexithera's rumbling harmony, creating a sound that spoke of possibility, hope, and the universal truth that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can reshape entire civilizations. The galaxy had learned many things from watching a boy and his dragon. That strength and gentleness were not opposites, that fear could be transformed into understanding, and that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was simply the willingness to see beyond what others expected you to be. And in the years that followed, as Marcus and Vexithera traveled from world to world as friendship ambassadors, they would continue to demonstrate that the greatest adventures began not with conquest or domination, but with the simple courage to offer friendship to those who had never known it before.